Hi, it's exactly 15 minutes past. My name is Vuk. I'm an alcoholic. I'm a local guy. I make files. I'm a regime change hobbyist if you want to play. But this is not about me. I am. My name is next to this guy's name on the program, which is very delightful and generous. But as a matter of fact, this will maybe be a little bit of a dialogue, but only in the end. The point is that we're like super happy and honored to have this guy Peter here with us, who is from the band. What did you say that other word was? Frozen Architecture. And they do great shit, and you've heard some unsurmountably great announcements last night at the last panel, so I'm not going to be adding any insults to that injury. There's going to be a talk, a presentation, a regular thing, and then afterwards I'll just jump in and try and think of some stupid question to ask while you think of yours. So you're going to be helping me a lot if you can already start thinking of questions while this guy is talking. That really saves a lot of time. Because the other option is much worse for you, and that is that we start asking you questions. You don't want that. Okay, so in order to avoid this embarrassment, please think while listening. Thank you very much. And this is Peter Polack. Ta-da!
Hi, thanks everybody for coming in this heat. It's really great to see you all here. So what I have to talk about, I hope, is going to complement some of the talks that we've already seen, which have been like really great, really pointed. And of course, what I'm going to show, there's a lot of maps, a lot of diagrams, and really this work can't really exist without the people that are actually trying to give their voice to make it happen. So, you know, we do interviews as well. What I'm going to show you here is a little bit more technical, but it's important to have the balance. So hopefully we've gotten that in the festival in general. I want to give a disclaimer just because we haven't had any kind of media in the festival so far related to the talks. I'm not going to show anything that's too intense, but in general, we're working with pretty intense footage. So if you ever feel uncomfortable about it, it's okay to leave. It makes sense. I just want to show that before I go straight into what we're talking about. So maybe some of you recognize this image, which was all over the media when this event happened. So this is Israeli footage of what came to be known as the Flower Massacre on February 29th. So this is an attack where over 118 Palestinians were killed, 700 more injured, one of the greatest attacks on civilians that were coming to seek aid. So when we saw this footage, we saw the Israeli claims that came out when this footage was released, right? So what were the Israeli claims? Well, they changed often. They actually released 5 different statements or so that changed their claims. They said different things every time. Of course, they said, okay, there were some, that Hamas was there. They were trying to interfere. In general, all of the statements, though, even though they changed, all the statements blamed Palestinians in some way for what happened, right? So when we see this, we can infer if there's some kind of large attack on Palestinians and then Palestinians are somehow blamed, that's probably not all there is to the story, right? So when we look at this image, this is an image shown above, like taken from above, like drone footage, and you can see like maybe vaguely make out some people, some vehicles, and we know that an image like this is like textbook dehumanization, right? This is a way that you take an image of a crowd, you show it from above, you show some thermal imaging, right? This is one way to completely make it appear as if it's some riotous mob of people. So if we take a look at some other image. This is coming from Al Jazeera. It's a very different scene of what was happening here. You can see there's just some chaos, right? There's people moving in different directions. There's people that are on top of a vehicle, aid convoy. So this is an event where there was aid coming into Gaza, coming in from the south of Gaza and moving towards the north. And there was a lot of confusion, right, about what had happened here. But what we found, what one of our researchers found, is that this event is only one of, you could say, at least 40 that we documented. This one on the 29th of February is the one that was the most reported, right? We saw this most in the media. But there were many other events that happened, which we found through open source media, on social media. Anybody could find these images, anybody could find these videos. And what we found is that the same thing was repeating over and over and over again, right? So this event of the Flower Massacre was not the only instance of this happening, as we know. Of course, there have been many attacks on civilians, but with these attacks specifically, this is specifically attacks on civilians seeking aid, civilians going to a point where aid is going to be delivered in order to receive that aid, and then attacks on those civilians. So, of course, here, we're not talking about all the attacks. This is a very small subset of attacks on civilians seeking aid. And what's also significant about this is what we do at Forensic Architecture in order to give an additional step of verification to the media is we take each of these events, as many as we can, and we geolocate them. We georeference them. So what this means is basically a researcher taking the footage and trying to identify precisely where it happened. And this is adding an additional layer of verification to the media. Often this media is posted by somebody. It might not be a reputable news organization, but we still know that this media has some kind of legitimacy coming from people that filmed it. And we can also locate this in time and in space in order to figure out what was happening there, okay? And what we found when we did that is that the vast majority of these attacks, especially the ones that I just showed you on that timeline, they're all occurring in this particular area. And again, we're talking about attacks on civilians seeking aid, so it's not just attacks on civilians in general, which are happening across the Gaza Strip, as we know. We're talking about these attacks on civilians seeking aid specifically. So they're happening here when we start to georeference them and figure out where they're located. They're all happening right here. So why is that? Some of you familiar with the invasion and the geography of Gaza might know that on October 13th already, the Israeli military ordered everybody residing north of the river, Wadi Gaza, to evacuate south, right? There's 1.1 million people approximately, and the Israeli military ordered all of these people to immediately evacuate, which is impossible on so many levels, and also goes to show how much of what's happening is an intentional act of displacement, an intentional act of uprooting, more than genocide, also trying to push people out of where they can live so that they can never return. And there's been multiple steps in order to facilitate a process of preventing people from being able to return to where they were. But what we see here is we see this creation of this arbitrary division, right? This is not, there's some different municipalities around Gaza, but what the Israeli military is doing here is imposing a new division. And at this division, we found that by November 15th, around this time, the Israeli army had already marked out a new kind of border that's cutting Gaza in half, okay? So this is the perimeter, the eastern perimeter of the Gaza Strip, and this is the river, Wadi Gaza, where they issued this military order that everybody needs to move south. And so then in addition to that, they created this route. And we see this with satellite imagery, and close up, you can see that they have kind of marked this out, and you can see the terrain around it is basically all bulldozed. Everything around it is cleared because this is a route that is used by the military. Now, if we look closer, we have this imagery that comes from Maxar. They provide satellite imagery. And we found that at this route specifically, there is some kind of structure here, and you can see this large crowd of people. Okay, so these are the people that have been displaced from the north up here, and they've been required to move south, right? Because not only was this order issued, but also there's been constant bombardment in the north. There's been bombardment throughout all of the Gaza Strip, but there's been an intentional effort to try to displace people to the south, because it was told to these people that if they moved south, that's where they could find safety. There were multiple safe zones that were ordered, that were issued by the Israeli military, that were located in the south. So people were sent flyers, sparse. Sometimes people were sent flyers. Supposedly people could check online to see that they were supposed to move to the south. But in general, there was this order issued for people to move, and many people tried to. And where they're moving along, this is somewhat important for later as we go through this, they're moving along this street, which is Salah al-Din Street. And this is what the Israeli military designated as a safe route that people can move on. What we know from our partners at Al-Haq, when they investigated this safe route, they also found that there was also an attack on this safe route, multiple attacks, as people moved from the north to the south. So this was not a safe route by any means. And we see also that where the safe route intersects the border, this is precisely a place where there's some kind of Israeli military checkpoint where people are being stopped, okay? So if we go even closer, and here we're using only open source media at our disposal, right? There's not really any kind of imagery that we need to pay for or any kind of specialized systems that we need to get this. But if we find on social media, we found a video here. We can locate it right here. This is this checkpoint right here. We see a video of what this checkpoint looked like. There's some kind of modified shipping containers here. And what you see is this is something that is starting to resemble a lot of the checkpoints that were already existing in the West Bank. Now they're being deployed in Gaza for the first time. And this is really significant because many people in Gaza have never actually witnessed Israeli tanks or Israeli soldiers close up. But now that's what's happening. It's become normalized in a way that now that there is Israeli soldiers inside of Gaza with tanks. And even though the Israeli surveillance system has some kind of record of many people in Gaza, it's probably not as expansive as in the West Bank because Israeli soldiers have not been there for some time. They were there before, of course, but for many people, this is their first time seeing this presence there. And what we also found is that on the other side of this border is a heavily militarized situation, okay? So any Palestinians that are moving from the north to the south, right? Moving from the north to the south. On the southern side of this checkpoint, there's snipers positioned there. And these snipers have been ordered to shoot at anybody that tries to move north. Okay, so they will fire a warning shot. They will maim people intentionally in order to prevent them from moving north. So you have to understand that this is a militarized situation that is supposed to be facilitating people moving through the border. And what we also found is that on another, this is coming later on, what we found is on another road that was designated as a safe route, we found another one of these shipping container checkpoints. And it was at these shipping container checkpoints that there were reports of facial recognition being used to scan the faces of everybody that moved through. Okay, so why is this significant? First of all, people that were moving through the checkpoint, they were required to show their faces and show their IDs to the cameras. And anybody that disobeyed doing that would be shot at. There were many people that were shot at just for like refusing to walk straight, walk slow enough, this kind of thing. This is a site that these checkpoints have eviscerated families. This is a place where people would have to go and they would be subject to arrest. Many people were like stripped, humiliated in this way, forced to comply with whatever arbitrary Israeli military orders. And this is basically a site where just the social fabric of Palestinians living here was starting to be destroyed. And so what we also see is that because of this use of cameras to collect biometric information, we already heard from speakers before, right? You have no choice but to submit to this, right? In order to go to the place that's supposedly designated as safe, you have to move through this checkpoint. Okay, so I'm giving you a sense of what's going on in this specific area. This is, again, north of Wadi Gaza, right? This is north of the river. The river is somewhere here. This is this new Israeli border that was created. The checkpoint that I was showing you first is here. The other checkpoint is here, okay? So when we look at the attacks on civilians seeking aid, what we see is that they're all happening around this area, okay? So there's a direct relationship between the lethal attacks on civilians seeking aid and Israeli military presence. So what we come to find is that in the place where the, quote, safe routes, the place where the safe routes designated by the Israeli military intersect with Israeli military presence, that's the most dangerous place for civilians seeking aid in Gaza, is the place where they're supposedly safe and they supposedly can go through and there's Israeli soldiers present. So when we say the Flower Massacre, that's one of these events that happens at the Al Nabulsi roundabout. And there's many other events of this happening around here. So it's a part of this Israeli military infrastructure that's been created. Now, why exactly has this been created? In addition to being able to find a way to arrest and detain Palestinians moving through to collect their biometric information. In addition to that, this is actually the site of the US port, the US pier. So probably many of you have heard about this pier being constructed as an ostensibly a humanitarian effort to bring in more aid. This pier from the US is located right here, okay? So when we talk about this route that's here, the checkpoints that I'm talking about are here. The US pier is here. And then these most violent attacks, not the most violent, right? But the vast majority of attacks on civilians seeking aid are happening right here, okay? So you know maybe about this controversy where there was an Israeli helicopter that was sighted next to the US pier. This happened during this operation to try to get hostages out of Nusayrat, which, as it happened, the Israeli military killed hundreds of people in order to do this. We were talking about this yesterday. And so there was some controversy in the media because it was seen that the Israeli military helicopter was at the same site of this US pier. Now, of course, this shouldn't be surprising to us because this is a part of one whole logistical infrastructure where the place where civilians are supposed to move through so that their biometric information is collected is adjacent to the US pier. And this all makes one logistical complex that the Israeli military is actively developing. And this is showing here a diagram of how this works with the aid trucks coming through. So the other crossings have been closed off. Sometimes the Israeli military opens a crossing for like a day, lets in some 30 trucks as kind of as a way to respond to international pressure. But for the most part, the aid that's allowed to get through is coming from the south and is basically required to travel all the way up to the north here. And here, it's intercepted by this Israeli military border. So the border here has a function both of preventing people from moving south and also a function of preventing aid from easily moving north. So this is starting to give a better understanding of why it is that these types of attacks are happening specifically here for aid. Now, if we take a step back from specifically these attacks on civilians, we've also documented hundreds of other attacks on aid infrastructure. And again, we're not talking about attacks on buildings in general, which are happening across the Gaza Strip. We're not talking about, as we call it, ecocide, the destruction of agriculture in the Gaza Strip. We're talking about specifically attacks on aid. And by aid, we also define this as any type of infrastructure and people and logistical facilities that are needed both to be able to get aid into Gaza and also to be able to make it be able to be consumed safely, to be able to be prepared. And in this, when we talk about aid here, we're excluding medical infrastructure, which is a whole different analysis that we've done. We're talking here specifically about aid. And what we find here as well, if we move down on this platform that we made, is kind of difficult to make out with the light, but there's a timeline here of all of these events. So as many as we can, we try to georeference and determine when they've happened in time. We use open source media and also satellite imagery, as you've seen before. So using the same practice that we used for these other events, we're using for these other ones, okay? And so what's really significant to point out here, and you can probably barely make it out, but there's a sort of progression with the types of events that are happening. So this, if you see here, this red, these red marks happening right here, January and February, these are this vast majority of attacks on civilians seeking aid happening in this time. Before that, if we start back here at the beginning of the invasion, there's many attacks of this brown color, which are attacks on bakeries, okay? And after that, we have these attacks on shelters. We have attacks on aid personnel as well. I'll define what we mean by that. But if we go specifically to looking at bakeries, if we take the same analysis that we did looking at the attacks on civilians seeking aid, we see the systematic attack and destruction of bakeries. And what's important about this is that bakeries were critical in the beginning of the invasion for people to be able to get food at all. In the very beginning, of course, people were able to cook more at home before, but then as fuel was cut off and people were not able to prepare any food at home, they went to bakeries. So we saw long queues of people standing outside of bakeries on social media. This media went viral and many people were starting to recognize that, of course, they could go to bakeries in order to get food. And what we've documented is these attacks on bakeries during this time. We have 3 documented instances of video footage showing queues outside of bakeries, and then subsequently, immediately after that, not even after, but immediately, with the presence of those queues of people known there, attacks on those bakeries, destroying them. So what we see is that there is some specific effort to be able to destroy a place when and where it's being used by Palestinians to be able to receive aid. And if we go along to the next part of this process, I'm trying to give a sense of, if we take a step back from this flower massacre, it's not just one isolated incident. If we look at where it's located in space and we understand how it fits into the scheme of things in time, we can understand what is the significance of this event for what the Israeli military is intentionally trying to do. And so one thing that's important to understand about how the aid convoys move into Gaza is they are escorted by aid personnel, civil servants, and this can range from police officers, volunteer police officers. It can include some of the tribal families that normally play a prominent role in Gaza as sometimes as arbiters of the justice system, sometimes as providing some kind of informal welfare systems. These people are also involved in escorting aid convoys. As well, these militarized divisions, these militarized organizations like Hamas and Fatah have their own non-military divisions that are responsible for trying to organize aid logistics. So you have these different actors that are all trying to escort aid to make sure that it can be delivered safely, right? Because what's been happening is the Israeli military has started to attack any of these civil servants, any of these people, regardless of their affiliation, if they are known to be able to escort aid convoys and facilitate aid delivery. So what's significant about this is that if we go back to the timeline, we have first an attack on this widespread attack on bakeries in the beginning. Once bakeries were shut down, people were being displaced to some refugee shelters where food was also being supplied. There were widespread attacks on those shelters. Subsequently, as humanitarian aid organizations were escalating their operations, trying to get more aid through, and as Palestinian civil servants were escorting these aid convoys, there were then attacks on those civil servant organizations themselves. Okay, so what happened in January and February is there are widespread attacks on the police that are escorting aid convoys in the south, and these attacks were so severe that they required police basically to suspend their operations, and they required humanitarian aid organizations to suspend their operations, like UNRWA and things like this. So after this had happened, you probably know of what's been happening at Al-Shifa Hospital. There's been multiple violent attacks at the hospital. In the beginning, this was a site where the Israeli military claimed that there was some kind of underground facility that was doing some kind of operations that they needed to target. This has been a site that we've investigated for some time. You can also look at our report on that, where there's been countless attacks on civilians. There's mass graves here as people try to face that. And what happened at this site is this is basically a place where, as other logistical infrastructure has come under fire, this is a place where all kinds of aid organizations, all kinds of civil servant organizations and people are able to have some modicum of being able to come together and establish a way of aid being able to come through. So what happened after these widespread attacks on police officers, there were different organizations that met here at Al-Shifa in order to figure out a way that aid could be delivered into Gaza, to people safely. And what we know, right, is this is the same time that these other attacks like the Flower Massacre are happening. So there's these widespread attacks on civilians that are seeking aid that keep happening over and over again. So there's some effort by Palestinians to figure out, okay, what is a different way that we can make sure that aid gets through so that it doesn't it doesn't result in these attacks. And when we see this effort by Palestinians to figure out a way for aid to get through, this is precisely when we see the second invasion of Al-Shifa Hospital, this time resulting in the complete destruction of the hospital. Of course, the first time that Shifa was invaded, there was this justification of there being some terrorist activity there. The second time that it was invaded, there was no such justification. It happened again, and we know that there was an effort here to be able to make it so that aid could be delivered here safely. And there is also media evidence of aid coming to Shifa and being delivered safely in the midst of all these other attacks on civilians that we're seeing that are happening under Israeli control. So I think from this, you can start to get a sense that there are multiple people trying to administrate aid, and the Israeli military is also trying to administer aid on its own terms. And in any circumstance where there's some effort to be able to administer aid without that control, these organizations come under attack. So what we find consecutively is that from cooking at home, that being prevented, the bakeries that people were widely dependent on at the beginning of the invasion, all of those being attacked and put out of commission, the shelters where people were being able to still receive aid, cook bread, those being put out of commission, police escorting convoys, convoys going to Al-Shifa, the tribal groups that started to play a more prominent role in overseeing aid were also attacked very systematically to prevent them from being able to receive aid. And this is as these massacres are continuing on civilians seeking aid. So why is this all significant? Also, I mean, taking a step back to try to remember some of the conversations that we're having yesterday. This is another interception of civilians that is happening actually in what the Israeli military calls the safe zone at Al-Mawasi. So maybe you've seen this safe zone that was issued by the Israeli military. Over the past weeks, they've started to slowly chip away at the size of the safe zone. They've changed the size of the safe zone many times. One time it was one place, another time it was another. And they really try to bend the boundaries of the safe zone in order to fit their narrative to say, okay, there's some missiles coming out of here, they're coming out of the safe zone. They moved the safe zone to make that statement accordingly. But what we see here is that this is Palestinians that have been displaced. And this is Khan Yunis here, the city in the south. They're moving towards the west, and they're being intercepted here by the Israeli military. If we take a step back, this is this Aqsa University, which was previously used by Palestinians that were camping there that had been displaced. This campus was subsequently attacked, and all of the people there displaced out of there. What we see as Palestinians are trying to move through in order to get to the safe zone, they're being intercepted again. So what the Israeli military is effectively doing is, first of all, destroying any chance that people can live where they are in the first place. They're uprooting people from where they are before. They're then promising them that they could go to some kind of safer territory where they would be supposedly safe from these attacks, which we know they're not. And then in the middle of that, they're creating a border. And at that border, they can then decide who gets to come through. They can decide who gets arrested. And they're creating a new, basically, border regime that they want to normalize. And also creating this technology that they use in order to criminalize more Palestinians and have more control over them. They call these checkpoints that we've been talking about, they call them drains. They call them smart crossings or drains in a pretty disgusting way, which is to say that they're trying to drain the population out of where they live and process them. And we had some of our speakers already talk about what is the global significance of this. Of course, as we know, the global significance doesn't really matter because this is enough. It's enough already to know that what's happening is completely wrong. It is a genocide, and even worse than that, right? Because it's completely uprooting any kind of capacity for people to live where they are. And more than that, there is the outright destruction of any Palestinian ability to have some kind of aid planning. Any intellectual faculties that are detected going on in Palestine, those are being destroyed. So we know already that this is enough on its own. But the Israeli military wants even more than that. Of course, it wants to export this technology elsewhere. It wants to take this technology that it's using here and apply it abroad. And we know some from yesterday that they're also applying this in Mexico. Israeli has contracts with the United States to be able to develop these smart towers, which, they don't involve a specific border like a fence, but they act as a kind of deterrent for people trying to pass the border, which ends up being lethal. And Israeli also has contracts with Frontex, which is responsible for pushbacks in the Mediterranean. So the Israeli military has an investment in making lethal border technology. And when you put all of this together, you have to understand this in the context of the Israeli surveillance state. The goal of this technology, let's skip this actually. the goal of this technology, which is basically leaked by some whistleblowers that used to work in this organization, is that when they're surveilling Palestinians, there's no difference to them in the data collection whether or not somebody's been involved in a specific activity. Information is more used for political persecution and to create divisions within Palestinian society by recruiting collaborators and driving parts of Palestinian society against itself. And any information that might enable extortion of an individual is used against them. So what we see here is a border technology that's being created to actually drive Palestinians apart. And when we talk about these attacks on aid, what's significant is not just that aid infrastructure is being destroyed. This is one part of it, that they're preventing aid from being able to get through. This is only one part, because what they want even more than that is to create a regime of governance that's complicit with the Israeli military. And any time that there's any kind of Palestinian agency, Palestinian autonomy, Palestinian resilience in the face of this outright destruction, anytime that there is any agency that tries to facilitate aid on its own terms, irrespective of the Israeli military, that is what it is targeted. So these technologies and border technologies have to be seen as a way to create a kind of leverage that then helps the Israeli military decide who lives and who dies in order to play into their plans for installing their own aid regime. And that's what we see with the border and collaboration with the US peer. You can see some more of this work. We've published it in different places, but if you go to gaza.forensicarchitecture.org, there's a kind of animated moving through some of what I've been talking about, probably said in a more clear and carefully tailored way. In general, there's some other things that you can read. I think some of this has been mentioned already. There's an Amnesty International report about automated apartheid. There's Jewish Voice for Peace Deadly Exchange report, which talks about collaborations between the Israeli military and the United States specifically. And there's also this book, which is really great, looking at the way that Israeli military technology is exported to other nations, looking at how the Israeli military has a vested interest in being able to profit off of its killing people. And I think that's all I wanted to say. Hopefully we can have some questions about it, yeah.
Beautiful, great, entertaining. Thank you. This is insane. Now we see why people yesterday quoted these guys' work so intensely all day. We spoke of many of aspects of this today and then yesterday a bit. We heard the legal framework of using such material for some Nuremberg 2.0 or for confirming the legal status of this activity as actual genocide and not a half genocide or something like that. I'm sorry for mocking it. It's not mocking. It's just that this is so not helping any of these people that it's like painful, but that's how it is. I'm trying to figure out one thing. Is this in any way, or is this research in any way organized so that you can get people involved? Are you crowdsourcing somehow? Is there an easy way to collaborate with you guys on establishing this archive? How is it done? Is it like some, I don't know, wiki or whatever else?
Yeah, so we're actively interested in trying to figure out ways that we can make the technology more open to other people to be able to use it, not only to be able to use these research methods, but trying to think about a way that we can collaborate to make this research more open. So, the main way that we do this is we're working with our partners at Al-Haq. We've also been trying to talk to Hamle about making something, maybe using some other data and research capacity. And that's the main way that we're doing it now, because it's very difficult to open up the methods just entirely. There's already an open source intelligence community, an OSINT community on the internet that's doing similar kind of work, but it tends to be pretty hasty. We can say it's pretty hasty and sometimes doesn't have the long-term analysis. But we want to try to figure out a way that we can open this up, especially in investigating the Nakba. It would be great if we could have more people involved in the process of doing this research, especially in a way that's meaningful to them. Yeah.
All right, and I saw you collaborate directly with media. I saw this thing done with New York Times, that other thing done with Amnesty. So sounds good, right? Like this big NGO playing with the other NGOs. But these other guys collaborate with you once, maybe twice, and then they try and do that on their own. Is that so? What happens there?
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. So as we've seen now, probably every media agency has its own forensics investigation unit. And one thing that's hard to reckon with is that a lot of these investigation units might not necessarily bring the same political rigor or the same depth of analysis, but they might use the same methods and aesthetics. So that's something that we're coming to grip with. And I think that at the end of the day, the work always has this political dimension where you need to be directly involved with the people that are going through these things. I think that's probably what gives the work its weight and helps to distinguish. But at the end of the day, if you're just looking at the visuals and the aesthetics, you might not be able to tell the difference, yeah.
All right. I can shoot these easily for some time now, but really, guys, as you remember, you had a task, which was to think while listening. Did any of you manage to cook a question, maybe, just maybe, for these guys, for this guy? I thought so. It's too hot outside. It's terrible. You're good? There you go. You see? It's not complicated. Would you like to talk into... Oh, there. This.
So your organization gives this information to like media outlets to, I guess, inform. Do you then have any like control or say over the way it's portrayed? I guess that's something that you were alluding to right now.
Absolutely, yeah. So there's definitely certain people that we wouldn't work with for that reason. And even from our experience, we know that maybe there's some collaborations we've had, but then they maybe spin it in a certain way, so we wouldn't work with them anymore. So that's one great thing about the organization, is that we're pretty strict and realistic about who we can work with. Yeah.
The point is that it's cheaper to have your own couple of guys try and imitate this approach than to work with these people. So a medium will simply say, some manager will say, okay, let's do this for half a price. And then you get worse result. And then they need to go through 2 or 3 hoops before they come back at you again, right? More or less, this is how, like, a business part.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, with the political situation, how much any kind of conversation about this is being repressed. It's just more difficult to have these collaborations in many circumstances also. So that's something we also deal with, yeah.
Sorry. I'm wondering whether you're also collaborating with ICJ or maybe some other institutions on that level.
Yeah, so we are actively working to be able to develop that aspect of it. I think that's been one of the new things that we've been introduced to in this part of the invasion specifically. The organization has covered what's happening in Palestine for some time, but some of the new things that we're dealing with now are, the pace of what's happening, being able to respond to that, and also trying to think through the legal language and the legal articulation of what's happening here. And yeah, this has its limitations, and I think that's something that we all struggle with in trying to define whether it's intentional, trying to define this aspect, but this is something we work with as well. Yeah.
Hi. I wanted to ask, would you be open to incorporate automation into the collection of the news instances, let's call them, like a pumping of a school or a bakery or any other kind of event? Would you be open to maybe scraping like Telegram news channels, local channels that have some sort of credibility, because they're crowdsourced, in order to scale up the whole process? Because like on daily basis, the amount of missiles that hit Gaza, especially like at the beginning of the war, or like at some phases, it is very extreme, the number of like missiles that land in Gaza, or like Gaza is attacked by. So would you be open to that? In order to really have a broader image of what's really happening?
Yes, absolutely. And thanks for asking that, because this is an aspect of this research that we now have to develop. So much of what we've done before is more qualitative research, but just because of the scale of what's happening, it's necessary to automate some aspect of it. So we have been trying to scrape data. We have been trying to develop a sort of dashboard of like the timeline of data and things like this. And one thing or many things that still need to be thought out is where to just balance the automation with the qualitative work. I think it's something that needs more attention it needs more attention from people that can understand both aspects of it, the importance of automation, and then also the way that you can't, of course, leave it to the automation entirely. At the end, you still need some concrete human analysis of it. And this is, I guess, exemplified by the work on looking at the attacks on hospitals, like systematic attacks on hospitals, where a lot of that information is sourced from these open source like scraping, but the hypothesis and the analysis that hospitals are being attacked systematically is not coming from the automated process. It's something that we observe through the more manual process. Yeah, thanks.
Don't ask ChatGPT to analyze this, please, whatever you do.
Hi. First of all, thank you for the brilliant work you're doing. Just an offshoot question. I know you've done a lot of work in the Naqab, especially with the murder of Bulqi'an and in the town, the demolished town, I forget the name, al-Hiran. And I just wanted to ask, is there any organizations inside Israel in which this material could be used for prosecution, or have you tried to explore the option of what it would mean to use this within the Israeli system? I know I don't believe in that at all, but is that something that you've thought about, or do you have any Palestinian partners inside with maybe Adala or something that could use some of this material to pursue within the Israeli legal system?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think for us, since we're occupied with this research, we're not often trying to look for those avenues in the legal system to be able to develop it. I think we would hope that we could make it useful to others to be mobilized in that way. I think one effort now in documenting the destroyed, massacred cities is to be able to just develop that investigation as widely as possible, to be able to archive as much as we can now, and then to have that used later. I think normally when we do the work, we're not trying to develop the argument so that it could be mobilized in a legal setting. That can change for sure depending on the case. But yeah. Hopefully that answers, yeah. Thanks.
Wait, is this in any way shared as raw data, or you just provide interpretation or your visuals? Do you also give out data sets?
So this is what we're working on now, right? We're in that territory now, because especially with the work on Gaza, there's many data sets that we've started to create and assemble. So we're trying to think about how we can expose that to people. One way that we do it is just through having a kind of interactive platform where you can look at all the data, but sometimes that's not enough. So we're also trying to balance between what's too much information, like who is our audience, like who is actually going to be using these maps? Yeah,
an API for courts.
Yeah.
Like a court in court in Tel Aviv that's going to suddenly develop a conscience and start prosecuting this shit. Yeah, but at least in an imaginary scenario where some court somewhere, ICJ somewhere, gets easy access to your data without your crappy interpretation.
Yeah, although it seems always, especially in those settings where there is a lot of work that you need to put in to be able to make it like legible and work for the lawyers as well. I think we would love to just be able to hand everything over. This is what we did, but there is a lot of. Yeah,
remember Creative Commons? There's 3 layers. There's like a human readable, machine readable, and lawyer readable file format.
For sure, exactly.
So you need something like that. Exactly. Yeah, you should talk to lawyers.
Isn't that the essence of your work on top, the unit that you created?
Absolutely.
To translate the
absolutely.
The legal argument?
Yeah, absolutely it is doing that, yeah. I guess that usually from the beginning of the investigation, it's not necessarily trying to make it so that it could be, made specifically for the legal argument. we like work with the material itself in order to figure out what happened. But it is true that in each case, there is a legal case that is around it. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I just want to keep the conversation alive. Yeah, but just to build on this, is there like what kind of partnerships do you think you would like to foster that this data could be used? Like, do you guys think of what kind of collaborations? Perhaps since we're in Slovenia now, is there any kind of would you if you would put a seed for a collaboration, what would that look like? Yeah, so it's just, how can we think of ways in which we can amplify, maybe not in a legal sense. I personally worked a little bit with your work in an exhibition, in an artistic dimension. But is that, are these possibilities to do here?
I think that's so much of the motive of being able to come here and present it, is hopefully to be able to have the method be used like locally or in other ways. We're always open to those kind of partnerships. We're really invested in trying to develop other centers where this type of work can be done. AHAC, of course, is one example. Also, like in Colombia and different places. So yeah, that's definitely the motive. And I think there's some of us in the organization that are really specifically interested in trying to do that. And it's just a matter of figuring out how. There's just exposing the methods, saying how to use them is one aspect. There's actually like actively collaborating together. And then there's also this more technological, trying to make tools that people could use collaboratively. And we're trying to do a little bit of all of that. But yeah, I think any kind of conversation about how to do that is important. Yeah.
I'm a friendly native. I'm a local here, and I work with the art community a lot, even if I don't want to. I can tell you of a few instances where we had already forensic architecture in different ways present in exhibitions. There was a big one in Maribor that was excellent, with this Gaza pesticide report from, I think, 5 years ago. There's been A.L. Weissman was a guest at Axioma Zoom call a couple of years ago and did in a book. So there is like basic awareness. Also, Mladinsko Gledališče had something, I forget what was it with these guys, remember? Millions of years ago. Forget it. But honestly, this is all cosmetics. This is all like liberal decoration. This is a local scene going through the motions and imitating solidarity. This is my take. It's not good. And we don't have any institution that fully, with their whole body, entered this particular small problem of occupied Palestine as their topic. You have individual academics, individual activists being sincere about this, but at the level of institutional collaboration, we have zero to show for. We have just some nice little like spices, if at all. I could remember 2 shows with these guys. It's very little. And we have many shows all the time. Beautiful decorative stuff for apartments of rich people. So no, sadly, I cannot overwhelm you with beautiful evidence of Slovenia being hypersensitivized at any level, at any level.
I was looking at the future,
Oh yeah, we can lie, we can lie.
For example, use that material to push the Slovenian government I'm just, thinking out loud.
Yeah, in this same room, on the first day of this event, there was an event in Slovenian language, so it kind of passed under your radar, I guess. There was a guy here who kind of have a bit of an understanding of international politics. He used to be the, president of Security Council of UN and later president of Slovenia. And he gave like this doomsday, ultra-pessimistic picture of options for civilian society, for civil society to influence the decision-making at the state level in Slovenia, because of the actual status of Slovenia in the international scene being super tiny. And there's been other super articulate people sadly informing us that there's very little that you can actually hope to achieve, but that should never mean you should stop trying. Just a little bit of situational awareness, like, oh, Jesus Christ, these guys are like getting us nowhere. No? So let's just kick them in the ass. Oh, there's more people here. I think these 2 guys have some sort of a plot against you. Exactly.
Yeah, I have one thought and one question. So continuing I guess just the material that you've showed us, it's really valuable when it comes to denouncing the shit. That's, yeah. So like still thinking in terms of communicating that and making that information publicly available, it could be it could be an idea to even maybe take that on as an organization, some sort of public relations, some sort of own media. Of course, like with these things, one organization can't do everything and cover every aspect, and this is maybe the like researching part, but maybe a sort of like building something new, which could even just be like an Instagram page or a Telegram channel, and have some specific people working on that so that you also have control over your own way of providing that information. I think that would be really valuable. And my question was, is retrieving this material dangerous? How, yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that's a really great question. Also, great comment. For the comment first, we are actively trying to figure out how we could do this. As you say, there might be different groups with different specializations, so how can you create maybe like the connective tissue between them so that they could be able to work together in a way that's actually effective? Of course, in the organization, we benefit from everybody being kind of in the same place, right? So it's much easier to facilitate that. But we're open to trying to imagine what those types of collaborations could be. And yeah, I would just encourage also everybody to try to develop those in their own way. I think we're thinking about it, but a lot of these methods, it is possible to get up to speed on how to start working with them. So I think we're interested in proposals for how to do that. In terms of the danger of accessing the media itself is not that dangerous if we're weighing like the different risks of these things. The main issue with accessing this media is that like it's getting harder and harder to access it because social media companies are starting to crack down on anybody doing anything that is not specifically what they're authorizing. So already it's much harder to get media from Facebook. It's harder to get media from Twitter after like Elon Musk's takeover. Stuff starts to get like weirdly like shadow banned. So some of the like the media and stuff that's been in here, it's like we don't see it for weeks and then suddenly we're seeing it. And this is the main risk is that, you know, as we're depending on this media more and more, if we're depending on these social media companies, then we're kind of stuck there. In terms of the risks, I think it is always wise to recognize the gravity of really exposing the information. It's less dangerous to collect it than it is to expose it. But yeah, it's a longer conversation, but yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Thank you for this great presentation. I just want to refer maybe to this problem that was exposed of how to actually establish this collaboration that would make this analysis of the information and translation into a legal language that can actually be used then in the courts. How could it make it easier? And I'm thinking the most effective way, I guess, would be really to find a way how to combine the technical expertise with then the legal expertise, and then finally to address it to on the governmental level where that can actually be enforced. And there have been some initiatives here in Slovenia, not so much on collaboration on a technical level, but inside academia, but it's very, very hard to communicate that to the government. So I think that if there would be a good project with a good consortium that would have strong actors such as forensic architecture, that would actually have some, that would be more than these individual academics or individual organizations trying to do something that would have kind of an impact. And that's why I want to ask, where are you based and how are your international connections? Because probably it would be more effective if that would be an international initiative rather than a national one. perhaps combining, maybe divided on the regional levels and so on,
Yeah, thanks for the question. This is something that it appears that we're actively in the process of moving more towards, right? Because while it is true that all of the investigations may have some connection to like a legal procedure, it's not the case that necessarily the argument that we're working with and the evidence that we're trying to collect is necessarily informed by a legal procedure. So while we might expose something that could be then used in a legal setting, it's a different question and a different type of expertise to be able to figure out how could the analysis be done specifically so that it's legible legally, right? So if I can remember the next part of what you asked, our kind of network is growing and we're trying to develop other places that are starting to work with these methods. So we, of course, collaborate actively with Al-Haq in Palestine. We have what we call is maybe like a unit in Greece, in Colombia, in Ukraine. We're based in London. There's a unit in Berlin as well. And really, any place that can actively collaborate with us, we're trying to develop that to be able to do that. But yeah, these questions about how to mobilize in a legal setting, I think they raise new questions and problems in each investigation. But it would be nice to have more of a specialization of people that can work with both sides or between them, yeah.
But historically, the situation is like those famous few reports during the Second World War describing very plastically the entire dramaturgy and the structure of Holocaust. And if I remember correctly, there was Ilya Ehrenburg, this Russian guy, doing that on that side, connected to Babi Yar, all this stuff in Ukraine. And also there was this famous Polish guy that smuggled himself in Auschwitz, got out, reported in 42 or 3 quite early on. And we're now, all of us, reading that same report during the Holocaust. And our hands are tied. And we're looking up. I was carefully listening to your question because it is implying exactly that, like how to act now that it's happening, not after it's late, not after some tanks of some neighboring country do pass that way and actually stop something. That something is fatally moving on every day as we speak. And I think this is the name of a picture. And the sad part is that here in Slovenia, we have a cult of close reading. You might remember the Ministry of Culture. The people who most closely read and learned from the lessons of Shoah are the perpetrators now. It looks like what was read there, it was not in service of the never again. It was, if ever again, it's going to be us this time. That's how it looks. It's horrible.
Yes, I think in this question of how we interact with the law, I would like to think that our work is not putting all of its chips in that basket specifically, and that we're trying more to develop these collaborations, trying to develop research also that wouldn't necessarily fit inside of a legal framework as well. Yeah, because, yeah, it's just one way.
I don't want to ask a question. I just want to give an opinion. I think it is the smart thing to do to stay focused on like documenting the data and presenting it in a way that could be useful for so many people from so many different sectors, and keep that work for the experts, for the people who work in the legal sector, to take your data and reform it, change it, and rephrase it. I don't know how legal people have to put, like, how they have to phrase their data or like show it exactly. But I think that what you're doing right now, providing the raw material that any kind of sector could use and could utilize for the betterment, is what is missing, especially that you're working with geodata, and that's very scarce when it comes to Palestine. I don't know about other areas, but like I think you're the only ones that are analyzing geo patterns of violence in Palestine. So I think it is our responsibility as fighters for Palestine to utilize this data in each one of our specialties. So for me, I can build models, AI models out of it. For a lawyer, they can take this data and build cases on top of it. So I genuinely believe in being so specialized in one thing and not trying to hold all the apples like in one hand. And yes, thank you for your work. This is absolutely amazing, and I hope all of us will be able to use it, to successfully use it, to better the situation. Thank you.
Thanks.
Well, unless there's any other intelligent questions. Oh no, come on. You use your coupon. No,
Okay.
please, no. But I'm joking. Please, no. I'm eager. I'm eager. Joking.
It's not even a question, that's the worst part. It's more just like a final comment that I have on what you were saying and what we're discussing now about the fact that you are not strictly relying or thinking just with that legal concept, so that you're trying to set that aside and focus on the facts. And I just wanted to add that I think that's really, really good, because sometimes we get really trapped into the legal terms that we have now, and we forget that these terms have been also built on, most of them that we're operating now were built on Holocaust, even though these crimes in some form existed before, but the term and the conventions and the codifications of that and the legal terms for that were built on that experience. And maybe, and that's not something very optimistic, but maybe there will be also developments in law based on these facts, because maybe we don't have already all the words and all the legal terms for what's going on. And yeah, I think it's very good that you're not limited in that way. And it's not a consolation, but perhaps there will be in the future something built on this evidence. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, a legal profession will exist, but the question is whether the Palestinian people will exist. So. That's a bigger problem. Guys, enough of this entertainment. It's horrible, of course, and sorry for joking. If there's no more questions, and I'm sure there's none, let's wrap this, please, and have a bit of a break before the next thing, which is at around our, oh, it's a lot of time, but still, we can go out and enjoy the weather. So thank you very much. I'm like super proud to be standing here with this guy and these guys, and see you around.